Morning, everyone. Thank you for coming. Seems like we've got a pretty full room, but we most of all have a really exciting session this morning. So I'd like to ask you, just to start off with a bit of admin, we've got a couple of sheets circulating if you'd like to share your name, your details, your emails, and particularly if you'd like to be kept informed. Please do give us your details. So my name is Fiona Gore. I lead the glass program at WHO, and I'm really pleased to open this session on behalf of a number of partners who have co-convened this session today. That includes WHO, includes UNICEF, the World Bank, the London School of Hygiene and Tropical Medicine, IRC, FCDO from the UK, the Foreign Commonwealth and Development Office, but also Aguaconsult and the Osprey Foundation. So thank you for being here. As I said, we've got an exciting hour and a half, and I hope we'll keep you entertained. But rest assured, Bruce Gordon is in the room. So, and I know we all want.
Okay. You've heard. Thank you so much, Fiona. Here I am. Good morning.
Give him a round of applause. And I do have to step aside because he's my boss. So.
Well, I heard the little bell go off, and when the little bell goes off, it always means you have to do something, and so here we are. No, but I just wanted to thank everyone for being here. Fiona mentioned all the partners. This is a really, really interesting and I think important initiative. We had a meeting on Sunday about this, and I remember one participant said this is something that should have been done a long time ago. And when we talk about professionalized service delivery, we obviously need to think about all the systems that support that. And then it gets very important to think about how we can define and monitor progress, which is obviously difficult. We're going to go through that today. But we already have a number of measures that look at the enabling environment and system strengthening. Obviously, the glass report. There's other tools like washbats that and some of the frameworks that look at at systems. But ultimately, I think we have seen a consensus that we would really value or would really benefit as a sector, like the health sector, to have a set of consistent metrics that can be internationally comparable and adaptable to country contexts. So I think that's all I had to say, Fiona, but it's really just a thanks to everyone. I know it's day 3 here, but this is a group effort, and what is probably more important than having the perfect indicator is having alignment and engagement with everyone, and of course all of you and your input.
That's great. Thank you very much, Bruce. And I hope, a round of applause. So Bruce, I have a question for you. Yesterday in plenary, a lot of people were trying to get your email address. Did you go and take your email address away from the system, or have you been getting huge amounts of emails over the last 48 hours?
Email hygiene is a term. Some people that are very good. Actually, I remember I traveled once with my Director General, and she would send all the emails from the whole day out at 2 in the morning. So every day she was conscientiously getting those emails out, and you'd get them. So I actually had to set my alarm for 5 a.m. because I needed to respond to them before she woke up. But then life takes over, doesn't it? And there's a lot of disappointed people sometimes.
So if you don't get a response from Bruce Gordon straight away by email, don't worry. He does eventually respond. Now it's my great pleasure and thanks for those opening words, Bruce, to welcome Aidan Cronin to come and say a few words on behalf of UNICEF. Thank you, Aidan.
Thanks, Fiona. Luckily, I don't have an email address, but I can send you pigeon carrier location point. Thank you so much, Fiona. It's a great pleasure to be here this morning, and we've got an exciting session ahead. I think we already had a full day on Sunday to kind of brainstorm on how this piece of work, which is really looking to identify a core set of indicators for the sector around system strengthening, a kind of a dashboard, if you like, that we're learning from the health sector on. We've had a whole a kind of series of discussions and consultations across a range of stakeholders on this, but it's really about the kind of understanding those top level kind of pulse check, if you like, of where the sector is on systems. And this is becoming extremely important for a full range of reasons. We get many, and I'm sure you do as well, many questions about contribution attribution on grants. What is your role actually? And what we really like to move towards is it's a sector lift as opposed to, all the individual agency lift on kind of tracking some of these critical indicators that define where the sector is in countries. I think it's also really important with the kind of state of the current discussion on climate resilience in the WASH sector, that we have a kind of clear narrative together on how we're going to tell our story as a sector. And we're a sector that hasn't told that story well enough yet to be really kind of positioned for the climate debate and financing. And we're central to the climate crisis. We know that from adaptation and mitigation side. So hopefully this work will really try and help us to focus in and come together as a sector around that and defining our story and how we track that more easily. So maybe that's enough to start with, Fiona, and let you jump in on the next steps. Thanks.
Thank you, Aidan. So Aidan may not have an email address, but he has a mobile phone, and I know he uses WhatsApp. So just, yeah, Aidan, make sure you put your mobile number there, but of course leave the email blank. Please do fill out that form. Now it's my great pleasure to welcome Claire Chase from the World Bank to say a few words. Thank you, Claire.
Thank you, Fiona. Good morning, everyone. So the World Bank is supporting this effort, we say, in collaboration with, so really led by WHO, UNICEF, but I think as the World Bank, we have a lot of experience to contribute on this agenda, fully, supportive and very enthusiastic about more attention to system strengthening. In the World Bank, we have been working on an initiative over probably the past 10 years on policies, institutions, and regulation, which is not the full scope, I think, of what we're talking about here, but certainly a really important part of the work that we support, and becoming much more important, especially when we think about how to engage actors beyond the public sector, so private financing, which we know will be needed to achieve our aims. And I think also the importance of really moving from the primary data collection to working with government systems and administrative data to be able to routinely report on some of these system strengthening aspects. So I think we see our contribution really on maybe three areas. One, I sort of mentioned it already, so we have a lot of experience of working on reform actions at the country level. We've had challenges with setting indicators and targets, and how do you set those targets that really show you're moving the needle, but we know that this takes a lot of time to reform systems. Secondly, we were really interested in supporting this initiative on building capacity at the country level for better monitoring and data collection. We do support a lot of, through our operations, government monitoring and information systems, so how can we integrate some of these indicators into those national systems? And then finally, the World Bank has several key data initiatives that I think will be important as contributing to the data that we're aiming for here. One is new IBNet, which is a database of around 2,000 utilities in 152 countries that captures data, self-reported data by the utilities on key performance indicators. The second is a new global water public expenditure review database, which is building on the report that was launched in May on funding a water secure future, and is going to be making those data available publicly as a global public good on public spending by governments, state-owned enterprises, and eventually private actors and households at the global, regional, and country level. So I think nothing more to say. Let's get on with the agenda, but thanks so much. We're happy to be here.
Thank you, Claire. I really take this opportunity to thank our colleagues from the World Bank, from UNICEF, and Bruce for these opening remarks to set us off for this morning. I'd also like to welcome you all. I see we have a full room. That's just really absolutely fabulous. I know we're also connected on Zoom. Mercy, how many connections do we have on Zoom? How full is the house?
I'm not sure because it's a webinar. I can see from my end. I think you can see up there, but I'm not sure.
Okay, for the moment I can see myself and my slides, but well, welcome to all those that have joined online on Zoom, and we thank you very much from wherever you've joined us around the world. So we've gone a little bit off script, that's what we do, but what I'd like to outline now is a little bit the key objectives of why you're here. Align to accelerate. And let me just start off by saying, were some of you in the plenary yesterday morning? Can you lift your hand if you were in the plenary? Okay, most of you. That's why you all laughed when I said Bruce Gordon was here. So Mary from the government of Ghana said something which was just absolutely critical. She said it's time for you to align. Development partners need to align to support us as countries. This is exactly what this session is about. This initiative is about us aligning to support countries in a harmonized manner. So the key objectives of today, I mean, it's pretty ambitious, but what we're hoping you'll get out of this is really for us to share what this initiative is about, why now, why is the time right, what is it, who's involved, and how are we going to do this. And I think the most difficult part here is how we're going to do this. But we can only do this together. And getting you involved, getting you committed and engaged. And towards the end, we really want you and to hear feedback from you of how you can contribute. It can be small, it can be medium, it can be large. But we're keen for this to work. It's going to be challenging. There's no doubt about it. So I think I've already gone through all these points. So moving on. The agenda for this morning was really to start off with some opening remarks. Well, now my colleague Marina, I'll ask Marina to come and join me. Marina's part of the WASH team at WHO, and Marina leads the work on the WASH accounts, which is part of the class team, which is about tracking expenditure at country level. Marina's overseeing more than 40 countries that have developed WASH accounts in different countries in the world. We're not going to be talking about that today, but if anybody's interested in speaking to us at the break, at lunchtime, we're here to share this work. We'll then hear from Kelly, who's been working at looking at a very large number of frameworks. She'll show you how many frameworks are out there, what has been developed, whether it be by partners, different international organizations, NGOs, but also what's being done at country level. And how can we make sense of all of this? And this is where we're talking about actually aligning and coming to some consensus around some kind of framework we can use to move forward, because ultimately we don't want to get hung up on that. What we want is to develop a core set of indicators that can be monitored to monitor the strength of WASH systems. That's going to be difficult, and we can only do it with you. We're then going to have a panel discussion that will be led by Angela Houston from IRC, who's sitting here in the front. And we've lined up a very, very nice set of panelists. So from Robert Ng, from the government representing the government of Tanzania, from NIMRI, the National Institute of Medical Research, so all the way from Tanzania. Warm welcome, Robert. Thank you for being with us. We've got Sam Drabble. Where's Sam? Sam just here from the WhatsApp Initiative program. We've got Nain Nguyen from USAID, who's sitting here in the front. And we have Tom Slaymaker from the JMP team, UNICEF, who's sitting right here. Thank you, Tom. We'll then be taking questions from the audience, from our colleagues online, and also getting your ideas and feedback on this. This is a journey, and we will be continuing, and we want you on board. Please fill out the sheet that's going around so we can keep in touch. And then Aidan will be closing this session at 10 o'clock. So the key question here, and let's get into the meat of this. A lot of work has been going on in the last few years on wash system strengthening. A lot. Many partners, many organizations have been working on wash system strengthening. But there's been no monitoring going on. And this has been a piece that has been lacking. Is this actually, do we have a core set of indicators to monitor the strength of wash systems that will support decision maker, evaluate progress, and ensure accountability? No, we don't. There has been some aspects that have been going on and some efforts on monitoring, but the bottom line is, the answer is no. Why are we doing this? What we see, and according to the latest JMP estimates, there's been tremendous progress in some countries, but many countries are lagging behind, and some are dramatically off track. Why? Why are some countries making huge progress and others are not? What is the magic ingredients that is allowing these countries to make such progress and others not? What does it require to move the needle? Now, this is why we're here. This is what we're trying to do, is trying to identify what the vital signs of the system are to ensure that a country can make progress and can reach national targets, but also international and SDG targets. So our common goal is really to have a multi-stakeholder initiative and to develop a common monitoring review framework that would comprise a core set of indicators that would operate in indicating the vital signs of, to measure and track the strength of the wash system. So there's a number of objectives that we have set out as part of this initiative. We have left a few copies of the concept notes, but we have a summary concept note, we've got a longer concept note, all available online, and we also will be giving you, we'll actually be giving you an email. We won't be giving you Bruce's email address, but we will be giving you an email address that you can write to get more information. But the idea is really for you, if you wish, to get involved in a process over the next 12 to 24 months to help us come up with a core set of indicators. What the idea would be is to work with a handful of countries to test the indicators. And I think one critical point is really for us to think outside the box and try and do things differently. But the most important point here is for us to align. We want the partners to come together, whether it be UNICEF, WHO, SWA, and I'm not going to name all the partners, but IRC, WaterAid, to actually align in what we're supporting, how we're supporting the countries in a unified way. The health sector has been doing this for 15 or so years. And on Sunday, we've been mentioning that some of us got together before the conference to discuss and move forward on this. And thank you for those of you that accepted to come on a Sunday afternoon. And we heard from somebody from the health sector working at WHO how this has been done with health system strengthening. And the message there is really that it's a long journey. And it's not an easy journey. And that's why, it's not going to be perfect, but let's move forward. And I think the idea is really putting the countries at the center here, and then us rallying round in a unified way and to see how this can be done to sort of really balance out some of the indicators that are being used at country level and having a right balance between the inputs, the processes, but also the outcomes and impacts. This is an example from the health sector of what the end product would look like. So I'm kind of starting here with the result of what a dashboard, a country dashboard could look like. And this is coming from the Primary Healthcare Performance Initiative from WHO, and what a national performance dashboard for country use could look like. And it's really sort of straightforward, simple, but of course what goes into it is huge. But that's just to give you an example of what the end product could look like and that we're aiming towards. Now, I'm going to pass over to my colleague Marina to take us through a few details about what we're going to be aiming for.
Thanks, Fiona. Good morning, everyone. It's a pleasure to be here with you this morning. So why do we need a common set of metrics? So currently what we have is a number of similar but different conceptual frameworks and definitions for wash systems and wash system strengthening, which are sometimes often being implemented in parallel in the same countries by different partners. And this is not helping us out. I think really the aim of this initiative is to, sit down as a sector and say, can we all be pushing together in the same direction? Government partners, can we all sort of move forward together and align on a core set of wash systems indicators and a common monitoring and review framework. So what this initiative aims to do is we aim to add value by reducing fragmentation. So as noted, there's a multitude of frameworks out there, and Kellyanne will be showing just how many we've been looking at so far. And by reducing fragmentation, we want to provide this common framework that can be used by countries and stakeholders in order to better harmonize and have a more coherent approach in countries and supporting country governments. We also want to shine a bit of a spotlight and provide some focus on the wash systems type indicators. So, based on what we've seen from the national monitoring indicators from a number of countries, we know that the outcome type indicators, just sort of like the coverage type indicators are quite well covered within the national monitoring systems. However, indicators on these enablers, these drivers of progress are quite thin on the ground among the set of national monitoring indicators in countries. And we feel that countries would benefit by having sort of a better balance and including some of the indicators on enablers within their national monitoring. And this will allow for more consistent tracking of the strength of wash systems in countries over time and also across countries. The initiative also aims to facilitate improved collaboration in data generation, analysis and use, and alignment of support behind country monitoring plans and processes. So really the objective is to strengthen the national monitoring systems. As Claire mentioned in her opening remarks, we want to strengthen the national systems and eventually to reduce the burden of reporting on countries. So we have here a picture of an iceberg. We know that what you see, the tip of the iceberg, is only a small portion of the whole mass of the iceberg. And I think what we're trying to do with this initiative is to try to agree on the tip of the iceberg, basically. So, we're not aiming to come up with a super framework to replace all of the existing frameworks. I think there will always be a need for specific tools, focusing on specific subsectors, specific issues within the sector. But what we're saying is, as a sector, can we all together agree on a core set of indicators that will form sort of the tip of this iceberg? And the very tippy top of the iceberg would be, you know, the SDG indicators or whatever is included in sort of the global development agenda monitoring. So again, I think what we're trying to do is, you know, not replace all of the existing frameworks and indicators, but, you know, saying, well, can we come up with a slim set of indicators that we can all agree on and work on monitoring together? So why does this matter now? I feel like we have a huge opportunity at the moment. There's this shift within the sector towards wash system strengthening approaches, moving away from project-based and infrastructure-based approaches. But we're not, you know, the non-alignment is not helping us. And, you know, we keep saying we're dramatically off track to reach SDG 6. Well, you know, what can we be doing to help countries accelerate progress? And the non-alignment, the fragmentation of effort in countries is really not helping us out. The stars are aligned, so we want to capitalize on the current momentum and broad base of support. I mean, I'm really excited about this initiative because I have seen how enthusiastic partners have been about this initiative. And so I think we really need to capitalize on this wave of support and enthusiasm. And so the time is ripe. While there are still gaps in evidence, we do have some, you know, experience on monitoring of wash systems that's been taking place over the, you know, the past several years. And so we feel that, you know, we need to start. We don't have all of the evidence that we need, but we need to start. And, you know, by moving forward, we can also support the process of generating further evidence. We have some favorable political wins, so water and sanitation are high on the international agenda. We have 2 upcoming UN water conferences planned for 2026 and 2028, and these will be strategic opportunities to secure high-level political commitment from member states. And lastly, you know, we're starting to see the end of the SDG timeline. So we're just 6 years away from 2030. And if we want to have the proof of concepts in place, the data pipelines in place to inform and justify the feasibility of potential candidate targets and indicators for post-2030, we need to start now. So from the GLASS team, we have been conducting a strategic assessment of opportunities on the SDG 6 means of implementation targets and indicators leading up to 2030, but also looking beyond. And I think what's become clear through this assessment is that we need to already be thinking about what we need to be monitoring within the means of implementation already in order to be able to have a proposal that we can make once the preparatory process for post-2030 starts. But I think beyond just, you know, getting some targets and indicators within the global development agenda monitoring, I think this is something that we need to do as a sector to benefit country governments and to accelerate progress towards universal water and sanitation and hygiene. So how do we get there? I won't go through all of this in detail because I think we've already covered a lot of this, but just to say that we're currently, you know, still in phase 1. We are in the process of developing a discussion paper where we are, you know, trying to put together all of the information and evidence, the various frameworks that have been shared with us and that, you know, Kellyanne has been working on in reviewing, and also bringing stakeholders on board. So, you know, I think this session is also part of this process. So as Fiona was saying, please, you know, sign up, get in touch with us if you are interested in being involved or being, you know, kept updated on progress. We would be keen to get your contact information and continue to have you involved as we move forward. And we're also in the process of preparing for phase 2, which is where we start the actual discussion on what indicators. So, and then we plan to have pilot testing and then upscaling. And all this, a lot of the work will be taking place over a 2-year time frame. So, quite ambitious, I think. But I think, as Fiona was saying, in a way we can think of this as just a start, because I think we will be continuing to be working on this going forward. And, this initial effort to define core indicators will probably not be the last. I think that was one of the key things that we've seen also from the health sector, that it's an ongoing process. So just noting, again, we are trying to build on previous work that has been done by partners on wash system strengthening. But I think this initiative per se has, started since about a bit over a year ago at a Stockholm session, so starting in August 2023. And since then, we've had a few milestones. There was a meeting that took place in London last year in October on accelerating wash system strengthening. And we also held a global webinar in June of this year, so a few months ago. And today we're here at UNC, and so, this is sort of an interim step, but we do aim to also hold a broader virtual consultation in a few weeks' time, knowing that, not everyone could be here with us today. And aiming to produce this discussion paper by the end of this year, and to form the technical working groups to start discussing the actual indicators early next year, and then leading into the pilot testing and upscaling. So again, we want you to be involved. In addition to the sign-up sheets, don't hesitate to get in touch with us at this email address, washmonitoring@who.int. And we're just really keen for you to be involved if you're interested, and hope that you will join us in this journey together. So thank you, and I'm going to ask Kellyanne to come up to talk to us about the work that she's been doing on the review of frameworks.
Good morning, and thanks very much, Fiona and Marina, for really setting the scene. And as they both said, we're in the midst of this, and just wanted to share with you today a little bit about where we are in the process of doing this review, which is part of phase 1, and kind of setting the scene, the background, as kind of a launching point for the next phase. So in this review, just wanted to share quickly a few of the key questions that we're looking at. So we've been looking mainly at what are the frameworks that are out there, looking at global and regional frameworks as well as country frameworks. How are the frameworks used? How are they structured? What are common indicator domains that are being used across different parts of the wash system's results chain? Whether they include indicators, what are the measurement methods, and to what extent are these frameworks linked with national monitoring and review processes? So those are the questions that we've been asking. So the methodology that we're using has been, first of all, to identify those wash sector systems frameworks. We undertook a call for evidence. We've undertaken a number of key informant interviews. As Marina mentioned, we've undertaken a strategic assessment of the SDG 6 means of implementation, targets and indicators, so looking not only at WASH, but across all aspects of the water and sanitation cycle with SDG 6. And we're also going to be harvesting data from the GLASS survey under one of the questions, which I'll talk about. We've now undertaken a review of those frameworks, mapping them across the results chain, and we'll get into what it looks like when we overlay those. And we're going to be proposing some options for common indicator domains. So one of the key aspects of this is, of course, that this is rooted in country experience and country needs and country demand. So one of the main sources of inputs at this preliminary stage is going to be the results from the GLASS survey that's ongoing. I think the deadline for surveys was yesterday, so we're excited to see, I think DRC and I don't know, a number of countries kind of sent their surveys in. So we're really hoping that this is going to be an opportunity to get a really broad input from countries at a strategic time in this process to be able to gather data. So which frameworks did we look at? And I hesitated this morning because I did bring my frameworks, but I have about 4 binders of frameworks. So we've looked at, so far, we've looked at 63 frameworks. We've looked at 47 that are global, 6 that are regional, and 10 that are national. This again will be complemented by the inputs from countries. The largest share are WASH systems frameworks. We also looked at specific subsectors, so water, sanitation, hygiene, WASH and institutions, water resources management. We looked at frameworks that focused on urban, that focused on rural. And of course, some of these focus areas that looked in at either kind of specific building blocks. We looked at human rights frameworks. We looked at gender frameworks. Anyway, tried to really cover a lot of bases in terms of where people have kind of looked at monitoring. We've also looked at contexts, and it came up to look at climate frameworks as well as fragile, crisis-affected and conflict-affected countries. So that's kind of the frameworks that we've looked at, and we have a list that's available if anybody's interested. So I can tell you, looking at all these frameworks, they come in many different shapes and forms, and it wasn't always easy to kind of make sense of how it all fits together. So this is kind of the slide of the frameworks that I looked at from global and regional partners. So maybe some of you see your framework there, but yeah, they're circles, they're triangles, and you know, they all are kind of looking at different ways of talking about the WASH system and talking about how you know, inputs lead to processes and outputs and results. We also looked at different country frameworks. You can see that they look a little different. A lot of tables, a lot of traditional results frameworks, looking at linking policy objectives with program and plans with key performance indicators. And that was really what we saw. Again, 10 is not a representative sample, but it was at least some indications of the way that countries are looking at their monitoring frameworks. So we looked also at the purpose of the frameworks, and so as we said, there's many different frameworks for different purposes, but also they are used differently. And because of course we're looking at monitoring, the largest share were in fact monitoring frameworks, but we also found quite a number of diagnostic tools which had varying extents of use afterwards for monitoring, but many that were focused on providing a diagnostic. We looked at some that were focused on benchmarking, a few frameworks that focused on change management, description of systems, and also a few frameworks that are used by global and regional partners for programming. I think one of the things that many of these frameworks also have tools. So I've been inside of a lot of Excel tools and looking at what questions are in there. But also I counted up so far kind of all the indicators, questions, checklists, and so far we're just for global and regional partners at over 2,700 different questions that are being asked. across the frameworks. And sometimes, of course, you can say, well, within those 2,700, some might be the same. But the other thing that I found is that the measurement methods are different. So you might have the same question, but then the way you're measuring it might be different. It might be a scale of 5, it might be a scale of 3, it might be a true-false statement. There's many different ways also that not only are we asking different questions, but also we're measuring them differently. So how does it all fit together? So I think this is the first question that people ask. You've looked at all of this, so how does it fit together? So this is just kind of one way that I've been thinking that it fits together. So when you look at them across a results chain, some of the frameworks are really focusing on assessing the enabling environment. Some are looking at, for example, investment readiness. So they're looking at factors outside of the WASH system that affect the WASH system. So they're kind of focused on that part of the results chain. There's others that are focused on system strengthening, management practices, technical operations, coordination, and those are kind of covering inputs and processes. There's another set of frameworks that look at functionality, sustainability, operational and commercial efficiency, kind of within that management frame. There's also frameworks that do performance benchmarking that tend to look at outputs leading to outcomes. And then, we have our comfort zone where we end up in outcomes with the JMP, where we see a lot of convergence there of countries using SDG targets 6.1, indicator 6.1.1 and 6.2.1. And then finally, we have the burden of disease and other impact indicators. There's a few frameworks that do cover the whole results chain. They tend to be built around a theory of change and also in programming design, as well as some of the human rights frameworks that are not only looking at human rights components of a system, but also looking at human rights outcomes. So just really quickly, of course, we don't have a lot of time this morning, so we do have a working definitions paper, and I didn't make a slide on definitions because I thought by Wednesday morning nobody wants to read about definitions. But just really quickly, what we're looking at in this part of the review were common indicator domains. And so what we've kind of defined as indicator domains are really kind of the broad categories that characterize the key factors or functions of a complex concept or system. And within our monitoring and evaluation frameworks, we're using indicator domains to really describe the areas where change is needed or desired and where progress towards a goal can be measured. And you can also think of these as measurement domains. And right now what we're doing is trying to look at the common indicator domains across the frameworks. But of course, in the next phase, we'll think not just what are the ones that are common, but what are the ones that are important to be measured. So this slide, and again, I'm sure it's quite hard to read, having recently taken an eye test from the back, but just to say we've started with the review to start to really group together some of the common potential indicator domains that we'll be able to look at. I can say that there's many different ways that these frameworks are organized. You see very different terminology when you're looking at some of the frameworks that are written for a utility audience. We reviewed 7 kind of World Bank frameworks, a lot that kind of were targeted towards that utility, urban sector versus when you're kind of in the SWA, Agenda for Change, building block frameworks. But we're trying to kind of group it together as an initial step towards kind of narrowing it down. So this just sort of presents some of these common indicator domains that we've identified thus far across 3 of the components of the results chain. Under the inputs, we've kind of identified finance, budget, ODA, external support, legal, policy and regulatory frameworks, capacity, human resources, the WASH workforce, data and information monitoring, institutional arrangements, government leadership, infrastructure assets. So again, not comprehensive, but these are the ones that we've seen coming up the most frequently. Processes has been a space where there's, I'd say, less convergence. I think there was quite a bit of convergence in the input groupings and processes. There's a lot of different ways that that is being looked at. But again, that's where you see kind of the planning, organizational strategies, monitoring, review, learning, and adaptation. The kind of this financial part, really looking at resource flows, how finances are being managed, how countries are developing finance strategies. Human resources management, training, talent management is a word we saw coming up that was kind of new. Also, accountability has been really common across many of the frameworks, looking at regulating, I think is what Robert was calling it yesterday, tariff setting, and in countries that don't have regulatory frameworks, how they're doing regulatory functions even without having those in surveillance. Anyway, also, of course, coordination, participation. Anyway, there's a lot that's coming up in the processes space. And then finally on outputs, there were fewer frameworks that we saw covering outputs. Countries tend to have a lot more on outputs than many of the frameworks that we looked at, but those have quite a bit on technical operations, service level, commercial operations and management, operational sustainability, seeing quite a bit about non-revenue water coming up as a metric that's being used in a lot of the benchmarking and utility frameworks. Level of participation, of course, with SDG, means of implementation target 6B, functionality, and infrastructure assets for outputs for sort of construction, rehabilitation, expansion of service, capital projects. So we have right now kind of working with two cross-cutting themes that seem to be coming up. One that was sort of a group around resilience, and that of course being climate, but not only climate, fragility, and emergency preparedness, pandemics, other types of kind of ways of incorporating, managing shocks across the system. And then of course, equity, gender mainstreaming, social inclusion, affordability measures. And we've really tried to look also at human rights monitoring in a cross-cutting way to make sure also that those principles are captured in also across the results chain. So that's a lot. That's kind of where we are. It's still, we've been trying to come up with a better term, but the only one we're still stuck with is sausage making, which for a vegetarian is quite horrific. But anyway, but we are kind of still in the messy part. But we do, hope to get this forward. And of course, with such a great talented group of partners and country champions that will be able to end up with good vegetarian sausage at the end of the process. And yeah, just to share a few insights and reflections. So this is, as Fiona said, a journey, but we're trying to be forward-looking. And as we said, kind of looking ahead. I think one thing that's really stuck in my mind is a lot of those country policies are 10-year policies. And so when you see kind of the opportunities that you have for making strategic shifts, they come up infrequently. So we need to look at how do we kind of seize these opportunities with also the preparation of the post-2030. We've been trying to think out of the box, and we are in a bit of a linear results chain, but we've also been hearing kind of words about being more fluid, adaptive, telescoping. So we're trying to think that through. If you have thoughts on that, we'd love to hear them. We also want to see kind of how this is positioned to make sure it really contributes to accountability mechanisms. We've heard, and I'm sure we'll hear today, that process matters. We're trying to learn from other similar processes to make sure that this is something that ultimately really has uptake. We've heard the importance of communication, that we're able to kind of land on some common terminology, some definitions that can have a broad base of understanding, but that are also politically acceptable. We're going to be clear on the scope, be transparent about what's in, and especially about what's not in, because this is not about being comprehensive, but really about trying to provide some prioritization and focus, which isn't always easy. And finally, we're really aiming to have something that is useful and used, to be able to be adaptable to local context. And I think a word that's coming up is interoperable, that this is a framework that's going to be able to work with the other frameworks that are in there, countries, partners, but also work with financing frameworks to be able to be tracking things that are going to be able to leverage the sector into climate frameworks, other types of frameworks that will be able to drive progress in a more coherent way. So, yeah, so that's it from me, and I'm really pleased to introduce your amazing moderator this morning, Angela Houston. So, Angela, over to you.
Great. Thank you very much, Kellyanne. It's been great to hear about the findings so far at this quite comprehensive but still early phase of the initiative. And already great to hear some of the insights and reflections that have come out from the initial consultations. There was an extensive meeting on Sunday, as was mentioned. And we'll now have the opportunity to hear some insights and reflections from 4 stakeholders, our panelists today. So I invite the panelists to come up. We can change the slide. And as they're coming up, before I introduce you, I see many important stakeholders and partners for this initiative in the room. And so Fiona is handing out some large, excellent UNICEF Post-it notes. We won't have time to hear from everyone today. There won't be group work, but we do want your feedback. So as you're listening, please do take note of reflections or insights or reactions that you want us already to take on board as this initiative goes, and there will be a time to hear from some of you a little bit later on. So as Kellyanne said, I'm Angela Houston Gold from IRC, and I'm also representing the WASH Systems for Health program from the Foreign, Commonwealth and Development Office of the UK, who's working on system strengthening and also learning about how best to measure that in partnership with countries and governments in 6 countries. So welcome, panelists. We have Robert Njie from the Government of Tanzania and the National Institute for Medical Research. Third to the end, Sam Drabble from WASUP, Nya Yuyan from USAID, and Tom Slaymaker from the JMP. So thank you so much for being here. I'd like to go and do a round and ask each of you to share a little bit from your perspective. Well, starting with you, Robert, from the government perspective, how is this initiative relevant for you when you think about how it applies or may affect the work that you do in Tanzania? How are systems thinking and systems approaches really addressed and understood in the sector? And what might this initiative mean for you or do for you when you take it into your work? So over to you, Robert.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Angela, and thank you for having me. A great pleasure. My name is Robert Njie. I'm a research scientist from the National Institute for Medical Research in Tanzania, but I'm also here for the government. So this is about monitoring, and I'm working on the data area, so I find my position more directly linked to monitoring, so I think it's easier for me. But from the government perspective, Tanzania began working more on the sector-wide approaches to WASH from the early beginnings of 2000s. And so we have done a lot of structural issues, interministerial coordination and stuff. So to some extent, we we have been addressing the system issues in a way, although our focus has mainly been on the service delivery. So perhaps we have not looked at them in a very comprehensive or in a very objective manner. So I think this initiative will facilitate us looking to the WASH system in a more objective way, which is something we have not been looking at very closely. So I think it is time for us to have things like common understanding of what the WASH system is, and I think this is not something that has been on top of the discussion, and it's I think it will take us there. But we understand that some of the challenges that we have today, like moving forward from the hand washing facilities that are from tippy tap to maybe more sustainable hand washing facilities, will need a good system support. We are looking into things like the importance of ceramics, which would need industrial contribution, for instance, and we are importing all those materials which are very vital for hygiene, and I think system kind of thinking will be necessary for us to move forward. And having data through monitoring system will also help us to have an objective discussion with the decision makers. Thank you.
Great. Thank you very much. And great to see how a set of a common framework or some indicators can bring, using your words, an objective approach to understanding how the system is, what's working, where are challenges that are relevant for different stakeholders, whether they're focused on hand hygiene or sanitation or different types of service delivery approaches in the country. Thank you so much. I want to go next to Sam. You've done a lot of work in many different countries, but often focusing on the urban context and working in areas where utilities are playing a major role in service delivery, where you're talking a lot about regulation and strengthening those aspects of the system. And could you share a bit about the relevance of this initiative and how you think it may apply or be received or useful or not to you and the stakeholders you work with in a very professionalized service delivery context?
Thank you. And just checking this is on. Yeah, okay. So, I mean, the first thing I'd say is the ambition here, of course, is absolutely correct. I mean, from my perspective, it really brooks no debate, having this consistent set of indicators to elevate system strengthening, ensure alignment. And I agree with, I think, Marina's point that the stars really are aligned. I think now is the time to be pushing this forward. I'd also, as an aside, say I'm a fan of frameworks overall, and kind of have become increasingly a fan the longer I've been in the sector. I mean, sometimes they get a bad rap, but I don't see it as a bad thing that you have all of this ongoing effort to create frameworks. I think it's indicative of efforts to structure programming, ensure that there's a logic around what organisations are involved in. And I'm probably on this panel partly to represent an organisation that is culpable in developing our own framework. So it might be helpful just to talk through kind of the process that we went through there briefly. So we developed what we call the Urban WASH Sector Functionality Framework. And we developed that because we were aware that we needed a evaluative diagnostic tool to understand the impact of our system strengthening work, but more importantly, as a process of prioritisation, identifying sector strengths and weaknesses to support our partners then in moving those forward. And we didn't set out to develop our own framework at all. Really the ambition was to co-opt another framework, and we went through, it was far less comprehensive, I think, than the process that's been taken here, but we looked at other frameworks and we felt that there were important contextual differences in urban that we needed to reflect if we were going to support our partners effectively. So those included around utility strengthening, private sector enablement, low income willingness to pay. There were differences at multiple levels, both in terms of what you might call the building blocks, but also then the sub-criteria. So we developed the framework on that basis. And that then even wasn't enough actually to inform aspects of our programming. So you talked about professionalization. and we then developed what we call the utility strengthening framework, specifically to support partners, utility partners who are really our core constituency. We work closely with them, and the USF has had, from our perspective, a positive impact. So where am I going with this? I guess two insights that I'd feed into this. One is ensure that the indicators that we arrive at have equal relevance to urban and rural. I'm obviously here representing urban, but I do think some of the frameworks that exist are still slightly more biased towards rural. And the second point is we will then need supplementary frameworks to support the right interventions at different levels. And I'd prepared this before the presentation this morning, but actually Marina, I think, answered this completely with her tip of the iceberg graphic. So that to me is the key. So long as this consistent framework is at the tip of the iceberg and there's recognition that then there are supplementary frameworks required, then I think it's going to have a tremendously positive impact.
Excellent. Thank you very much, Sam. And I also continue to think in terms of this iceberg and know where there is possibility to align, let's go for it. But absolutely, when you're doing technical work and you're wanting to get insights to inform decisions and programming and plans, you will need to, of course, have a richer set of data than a slim set of indicators as we're talking about here. So thank you so much. Na, I want to go to you next, and I know you're a specialist in social and behavior change, but you, as well as USAID overall, has invested quite a lot in monitoring and accountability and systems approaches as well for how to understand and strengthen the sector in a way that may last beyond a specific program as well. Could you share a little bit about the relevance of this initiative for you, for USAID, and how it might be relevant for your work going ahead?
Yeah, so can you hear me? Yeah, I think there's sort of two areas of relevance for us, the relevance within the WASH sector and the relevance beyond the WASH sector. I think it's interesting because, as you know, USAID supports governments through our implementing partners. And all of our implementing partners address systems in one way or the other. Everyone works on governance, finance, capacity strengthening, coordination. But I think that every organization has a slightly different approach. So I think having this common set of indicators will give us the goalposts on how we direct our funds, how do we guide our implementing partners to support the government in achieving the indicators. And I think systems is a little bit been a black box, right? So we talk about access, it's clear, we can explain the JMP ladder to our colleagues beyond the WASH sector, but then when we talk about systems, it's like, well, there's all these components, right? And so I think it will give its clarity for us to be able to articulate, to also have a common understanding within the sector, but then to articulate to our governments, our partners, and those beyond the WASH sector. I think in particular within USAID, within global health, we are really looking to find synergies from the WASH sector and the health sector, right? And we really believe that WASH is fundamental to health system strengthening. But identifying the entry points and the ways to collaborate between WASH and health systems has been thus far a bit of a challenge. But if we have common definitions and indicators of the way that we define our systems, I think we can find much more common ground and opportunities to work beyond our sector and really expand the influence of WASH beyond this room.
Thank you so much. Excellent, and I'm getting excited listening to you because we've long talked about the importance of recognizing the role of water or sanitation or hygiene within a public health system, within a wider governance system, or within the landscape of public financial management in a country. Why are these services important, and what are the things that need to exist? What processes need to be in place for WASH services to be developed and sustained? And so the ability to concretely say, this is what we're talking about, these are some of the key aspects of that system that we're talking about, is really essential for also bridging that gap and being able to align and discuss and be a better partner to others outside the sector as well. Great. Tom, I would like to come to you next and ask you a slightly different question. as we've been discussing, there's a lot of consultation, there's a lot of analysis that goes into getting many very different types of actors and partners to align. It's something myself I have had some experience with, trying to say, how can we not duplicate efforts and really agree here, yet we're looking at a slightly different context. So I want to ask you a little bit about the how we go forward in this initiative. And I know you've been involved in, with the JMP, of course, even pre-2015, the development of the measurement and monitoring approaches around the SDGs. And you're also involved in some of the discussions about how do we measure going forward, post-2030. Could you share a little bit from your experience in those processes about what's worked, what doesn't work, and maybe how you'd say what we can learn going ahead in this process to consult, right, and come out with a great result?
Yeah, thanks. Quite a big question and a very complex topic. I agree with colleagues. This is very complex agenda. We had some success building consensus around outcome indicators that are used for SDG monitoring. But that was quite a long process. So actually started in about 2011, 2012, and then continued very intensively right up until the SDG indicators were agreed in 2015. And the way in which that worked was a combination of holding big meetings to bring together the stakeholders in order to agree on what is important. Okay, so these are the sort of domains or the subdomains. To agree in very broad terms what are the common elements of the framework, but then to have separate technical groups that were tasked with going away and working through in a lot of technical detail how do you measure these domains? Because people will have views on what's important, but they may not have recommendations on how to measure and monitor. So in the case of the WASH indicators, there was a technical working group on water, drinking water, one on sanitation, one on hygiene, and one on equity and non-discrimination. And they all worked continuously over a period of about 18 months, reporting back, discussing with each other, thinking about how these things fit together, and then reporting back to the broader group of stakeholders for a sort of endorsement of the proposed approach and way forward. And those groups were very diverse. So they were all technical experts, but they came from different backgrounds, different professional backgrounds, but also different countries, different regions. And the emphasis was on trying to develop a common set of metrics which would be universally relevant. And so they would work in India and they would work in Madagascar. Okay? And so that was the test that we kept coming back to. And it was very important to get those views all the way through, especially from government stakeholders. We had a lot of people who were ex-government, who'd spent a lot of time working in government, and they were extremely helpful in trying to figure out what was going to be feasible. So one thing is, what are we talking about is indicators rather than targets. And I think this is important because those post-2015 working groups were actually looking at targets, and then they were told at a certain point the targets are for the politicians. So you focus on the indicators, we'll deal with the targets. So that's important. But the other thing that's very important is that indicators have to have a purpose. So indicators become part of an indicator framework. And this is what evolved then for the SDGs. And when I say indicator framework, that means how are those indicators expected to be used? How are they expected to be used at the global level, at a regional level, and at a national level? What are the data sources? What are the methods? And how will data flow from a national level up to a global level for global reporting? So all of those things had to be figured out as well. It's not just the indicators themselves. And in fact, that development of the indicator framework, the data standards, the capacity building for monitoring has continued ever since throughout the SDG period. So it never really stops.
Great. Thank you very much for that. And I can see people scribbling down, writing notes, things to keep in mind. I think it's really exciting to have you and the JMP on board with this, to also make sure that we're learning from that process, keeping it in mind, looking at the timeline going ahead. And I like that last point, making sure it's very easy for some of us nerds to get excited about what are the indicators. But there's a whole aspect, it has to be useful and usable and feasible for the different stakeholders involved. Thank you for that. Do continue to write down any notes or questions or comments that you have. We'll get to those shortly. But I want to do a last round with the panelists, acknowledging that this is a challenging initiative, but the time is right. It's worth it. That's what we continue to hear. It's absolutely worth the effort going into this initiative for what we can get out of it. With all these partners on board and ready to contribute to the process, I want to ask each of the panelists for a word of wisdom, advice from your perspective or the institution that you're representing. What should we keep in mind? What should the various partners consider going forward to ensure that we come out with a successful outcome of the process? So I'd like to give Robert the chance to go first, and then we'll continue from there. Thanks, Robert. Word of wisdom for us.
Thank you. I agree with the idea that it is an opportune moment because, like in the case of Tanzania, the health sector is already very much talking about health systems strengthening with the look into primary healthcare systems. So I think this discussion on WASH systems resonates with what is already in progress right now. So I think it's a rightful idea. But maybe what makes me think is the fact that we already have different monitoring systems, even for WASH, like WASH MIS for sanitation is different from the health MIS. But we also have monitoring, progress monitoring for our program, for the national program. That is, all these are separate systems monitoring WASH, health and water sector that we want to. So I think what we hope to see is that the new monitoring system will not confuse any further the already existing multiple systems, but it will contribute to strengthening it, and and so things will work better. We'll work in harmony, but again, we are still looking at service delivery, so we hope that it will help us accelerate the gains that we are. Let me finish by saying I think we are keen on learning and being part of the process, so it will be nice to be part of this process, maybe from piloting, or we are excited. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Robert, and exciting to hear your interest in being part of piloting the process, that you can take it to Tanzania and see how this can fit, complement, support, and help to find harmony amongst some of the existing systems that you have. Thank you, and very exciting. And raising the bar on the question, wisdom and the role you may play in taking this ahead. So you're next, Sam.
Okay, so yeah, two points. I mean, one is really broadening out the consultation so far as possible, and feel free to draw on partners, including the partners in this room, because we talked about the moment being right for this initiative, and I really feel the will is there at the sector level, so I don't think that should be a challenge. And you can really, by drawing on those partners and their networks and the many countries that then brings into scope, you can broaden the consultation beyond just a narrow set of pilot countries. You absolutely need those more in-depth pilots. But I'd draw on partner networks to broaden out the initial consultation. And then the second point, I don't know how wise this is, but it's just my 2 cents. I think frameworks can be at their most useful when they cut through the noise. And I'll give you an example of that. In citywide inclusive sanitation, in the sector itself, you hear people saying that we don't know what citywide inclusive sanitation involves. And I to an extent, disagree with that, because I think there are frameworks that do cut through the noise. So the SOAS Gates framework for CWISE sets out responsibilities, accountability, resource planning and management, and it's very succinct, emphasises equity, and there's much more to it, but I think it gives a sense. Of course, this topic is incredibly complex, so I'm not saying that's where we should arrive at, but I think it's helpful to look at it in a two-tiered process, and Tom articulated this very well. I think you should be looking at initially the subdomains, and I'd say keep those relatively concise and clear, and then recognise all of the complexity to follow is in the measurement piece, and the technical groups that Tom mentioned. You could look at a similar process here. So yeah, we need to incorporate all of the complexity, but I'd break it down into those two levels so that the user of this framework, the first thing they see is a relatively intuitive interface, a set of indicators they understand, and then you acknowledge all of the complexity in the way those actually are measured.
Excellent. Very clear. I like that. Draw on partner networks as well to ensure that relevance across different contexts, as Tom mentioned, and keep it simple and concise at the end of the day. What's outward facing? We know a lot will go into this, but it funnels through to something that people can grab onto and use in their different roles. Thank you so much. Nah, how about from your side?
Yeah, I think my words of wisdom are not that wise, given that you've already had the same words of wisdom. So I think I picked up on the word interoperability. I think that is a consideration where you're thinking further down in the tools, right? How can other sectors look at the tools for collection and say, oh yeah, I can see that. That's reflected in our systems too. And I think for the governments, let's try to reduce friction where possible, right? Because let's make it easy and not an extra burden for them to collect the data, right? We should be able to say, oh yes, you're already doing this and this adds on, right? The benefit for them is this, and the tools for collection are not so complicated. So a little bit further down the path, but just keeping as simple as possible.
Absolutely, thank you. And wise indeed. I like that, reducing friction and what that will take to listen and understand those who are going to be using the framework and engaging with it and actually doing the implementation and data use. Tom.
Already some good points. I think, yeah, I would agree. I mean, the first thing is just think about who else needs to be in the room, the other sectors. Certainly health systems intersecting with wash systems, but also, water resource management systems, I think, need to think carefully. And lots of opportunities to kind of piggyback on work that's going on other systems and other sectors. So, Claire mentioned, public expenditure reviews and mapping, which go, far beyond WASH, but those data already exist. But the other point I think I wanted to highlight is we have to be clear about why this agenda has not moved forward already as quickly as we would like it to have. And if we reflect back on the SDGs, the whole kind of concept of the means of implementation and the systems which support the delivery of the outcomes was really added at the last minute, and that's because it's complex and difficult, and there were a lot of member states who were uncomfortable moving into this space, and I think that remains, and so we need to approach it carefully with our eyes open, and we need to understand that things like finance are politically sensitive, but some of these indicators and some of these domains are not value free, and so the GLASS team knows this very well, and is already very aware of the need to present data in a neutral manner in order to convene people to have a conversation about how to move the sector forward. But we ultimately should be doing these things because we think they're important to do and that they're going to move the sector forward, not because we think they might be part of some future global monitoring framework. If they are, so much the better. But if we're confident that they're worth doing and that the effort and the data that results is going to move the sector forward, then we should do it anyway.
Excellent points. I won't attempt to paraphrase any of them. Thank you very much, Tom. We have just a couple minutes to get maybe hear from one or two of you in the room or online if there's chat. Just a reflection of something that you've written down while listening, something you'd like to see in terms of ensuring that this initiative, as Tom said, moves the sector forward, benefits our work, takes us towards the outcomes that we're aiming for in the sector, or to share how you'd like to be a part of it. So I'm looking for hands in the room. We'll have time to hear just a couple. Yes, great. I haven't seen you this week.
If you're asking a question, could you please come up to the mic just so everybody can hear?
Thank you.
Maybe bring the mic.
Thank you. And we'll keep it brief. We'd have just a couple minutes here.
Okay, thanks, Angela. I am Musa Tezazu from Millennium Water Alliance, Ethiopia. It is a nice initiative, and I am so happy to hear about this vision. Having said that, I have a few questions for clarification or thoughts. The first one is the pathway. How does the timeline look like for next steps? The second one is what coordination and communication mechanism put in place to capture feedbacks from key stakeholders across regions and countries. The other one is quite often the government partners prefer to see changes in infrastructure development and monitoring mechanism related to outputs and inputs. When it comes to wash system strengthening, it is more on outcome level, which requires active participation of stakeholders, collaborators, and it requires also time and other resource. So how to manage the potential frictions from government stakeholders? Thank you.
Great, thank you very much. For the first two questions on timeline and some of the coordination mechanisms, I'll hold that. We'll finish with some next steps and show that timeline again. And I want us to be thinking about that question, how to, I think the word you used was government friction or resistance or aligning with what the priorities are of the government, which are absolutely essential to be informing the work. Thank you, Musi. Is there another hand? Yes. Yeah. Here, in the center. And I think this is the last one we'll have time for. Thanks.
Thank you very much, and thank you for giving me the opportunity to ask a question. I'm called Idrakwa Lilian from Uganda. I work with the government. This is a great initiative. I would like to add my voice in appreciating. My first question is, maybe I didn't follow the presentation very well, but I was wondering whether we've had a chance to review the challenges that are being faced in the implementation of the SDG indicators. I think if we are working towards setting up a set of new indicators post-2030, it would really help if we documented the challenges that are being faced in implementing the current set of indicators. Then the second thing is, when I kept hearing about sector, I would immediately think about the water sector. And then people are thinking about the health sector or wash sector. I'm glad somebody said that we have different understandings of these indicators depending on which sectors we're working in. And for me, a piece of advice would be, as we are working, let's recognize the lead institutions in these different sectors in the countries, because ultimately it will be these institutions that are responsible for data collection and responding or reporting on this set of indicators. Thank you. Maybe lastly, for the last indicators, when the SDGs were being, the SDG indicators were being set, I think professionals or individuals were picked from the countries, but maybe I would suggest, if possible, in the different countries, let's have a team of professionals working together, and then from that team we can have some lead to join the global group. That will facilitate consultation within the countries for us to get also good information and later on buy-in from all the stakeholders for implementation. Thank you.
Great, thank you very much. We don't have,
Should we see if there's something online?
are we allowed to go over by a couple minutes? I don't think
Mercy,
so.
do we
We
have
have general appreciation online.
General appreciation online. Thank you so much for being here. We'll record what's coming into the chat. So I'll ask if one of you would like to take a very brief answer to addressing the issue of government friction, or let's say prioritization of outcome or output type indicators, how this might complement that, or the question from Uganda a little bit on what are some of the challenges faced to make sure that we're taking those on board. And I know it'll be very brief now. I'm also writing those down so that we can address and cover some of those in the next webinars and communications going forward. Sam, you look ready to speak.
Oh, do I?
Yes.
I didn't mean to look ready to speak. But
That's all right. Nod, you want to go? Okay, go ahead.
but no, I can be very, well, I think others will have perspectives on this as well, I'm sure. But in terms of government, the government question, all I'd say is I think come back to Tom's point around, who is in the room. So in terms of this process itself, one thing that can be encouraged is ensuring that there's cross-ministry representation in the process of discussing indicators and the measurement process itself. And certainly we've found that in my organisation kind of at a lower level to be really useful in the sector functionality process, just having all of those stakeholders together to arrive at negotiated consensus on where the sector is and the strengths and weaknesses. If you're promoting that dialogue between the different government actors, I mean, that's, in a sense, that's as far as you can go. There is going to be some tension, but that will be my perspective.
Absolutely. Thank you. Robert, did you want to add? Brief remark and then we'll conclude.
Not much, but I agree with the need to involve the governments in this process more, so we can bring up the issues. I think to avoid the friction, I think the main issue would be not to overburden the monitoring processes and to keep our interest on service delivery.
Great. Thank you so much. I think those are essential points to keep in mind. I'm going to conclude there and invite Aidan Cronin to come up for a reminder on the next steps for the initiative and some concluding remarks. Please join me in thanking our panelists.
Yeah, thanks so much. No, just maybe very, very quickly, 4 points I took away from the session. One is general appreciation that this is a good initiative and needed. There are complexities, but probably can be surmounted if we're very clear on the purpose and value out of this. Second, I think it came up across nearly all the comments around the importance of a participatory process and involving lead institutions. So I think that was heard. 3 is how we link across other sectors, but also within our own broader water resources sector, and how we can learn from what others are doing. And I guess the tension with this type of approach, which a couple of the panel have hinted at, is it's always there's always a tension between the weight, the comprehensive kind of approach versus what you can actually then practically lift up. So there's always a kind of a trade-off there, but I think it can be done if the communication feedback is good. So in terms of next steps, there'll be a virtual consultation in November, and then working into next year in terms of finalising a discussion paper, and eventually taking that and testing as well, mid next year onwards. And then some of the takeaways. I think we do recognise the benefits, and that's been, discussed today on this approach, that we have a common understanding, but that we really need again to learn from experiences from others and recognise the challenges in moving ahead. And I think what the process that we're trying to land on is really trying to address those takeaways. Just to say, this is a heavy lift, or a common lift, across a huge range of organisations and partners. Many logos there. If you would like to be involved, please let us know. We'd love to, I think, get more more colleagues and more partnerships and organisations involved. So it's a very open process. But just to say thanks to everyone who's started the journey so far. And thanks for a great session.
If you've written some notes, please do bring them. We'll collect them here on your way out and make sure to take them in. Thank you so much.